Hello, and welcome to the second video in a series of 4 videos designed to help people who are studying for the membership quiz to join the National Association of Parliamentarians. So by now, you should have already seen the first video. If you haven't, and you shouldn't be starting here, you should go back and watch the first video. And it should be available pretty much in the same place that this one is. So this series is produced by, as you can see here, the International Services Committee of the National Association of Parliamentarians, and is based on the chapters, the first 11 chapters. The whole series is based on the first 11 chapters of Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief. As by now, again, you should have a copy of that, which is available on Amazon.com in either paperback or in the Kindle ebook. So, and then the other thing you should by now have downloaded and begun work on the practice questions that are found in the NAP membership study guide that you see pictured there on the left. And which is available at the URL there, which is the site for the National Association of Parliamentarians website, which is www.parliamentarians.org. Okay, so let's get into it then. I am, just to remind you, Dr. William J. Pewitt. I am a parliamentarian. I am a credentialed parliamentarian by the National Association of Parliamentarians as a professional registered parliamentarian, and by the American Institute of Parliamentarians as a certified parliamentarian. And as you see, again, I live in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and can be reached at that email if you have any questions that you need answered. The course overview here shows that we've already done the first video based on the first 2 chapters in the set of 11 chapters upon which the membership quiz will be based, covering fundamental principles, why rules, order of business, agenda, etc. So now we're going to, in this video, the second video, we'll be looking at handling a motion, debate, and amendment, based again on the 3rd edition, so you should have the 3rd edition, and we'll be looking at pages 18 through 51, so you might want to have your books at the ready so you can follow along. Motion handling, or how decisions are made at a meeting. Well, we start with these important definitions. The term motion and main motion, these phrases are going to become increasingly more important as we go along, so you really need to understand them. As found on page 19, the definition of a motion is a formal proposal by a member in a meeting that the group takes certain action. Right? And the idea of a motion is much more general and encompasses things besides main motions. There are, as we will see, secondary motions. Okay, but we're going to focus on the main motion in this set in this video. And so the main motion is more specific. It is not just one that brings a formal proposal, but it is one whose introduction brings business before the assembly, right? So that distinguishes it from some of the other secondary motions. And this is a nice little, I thought, nice little sketch or diagram of how action takes place at a meeting, particularly with how a main motion is going to be made and work through its process. So you see it has here 8 steps. There's different ways it could be looked at, but I like this diagram for separating it out as you see. And we'll be going through each one of those steps one at a time. Right? How decisions are made, except in meetings of committees, and this is important, there should be no debate on a matter before a motion regarding it has been made. This is a very common problem in groups that have not been trained in parliamentary procedure or have not any basic understanding of that. So it's so easy, and many times when I'm myself or any other parliamentarian is asked to come in to help a group, it's because for some reason they've gotten off tangent, and the chair will let pretty much anybody speak about anything, even though they're not making a motion on which to focus their speech. So this is, in Robert's Rules of Order, a very, very important rule. It's articulated several times, actually, in the large book, and you can see it on page 19 in the third edition. Again, except in meetings of committees. Committees are allowed to be more brainstorming in their character, but a regular assembly, which is not the committee, no debate until a motion regarding it has been made. First the motion and then debate. And I have some friends who, when I tried to explain this to them, said, oh, they like to, prepare the ground by this long speech narrative and then cap it off with their concluding motion. That may be a very interesting rhetorical device, but it is not allowed in Roberts. Right? Start by setting the motion forward, and then debate may follow. And the other thing is only one main motion may be before the assembly for action at a time. Now, there are secondary motions, and that's not what this is about. This is about a motion that brings business before the assembly, right? So that principle then is a fundamental principle of parliamentary procedure, one main motion before the assembly for action at a time. So this is the same sequence that you saw in that diagram. We're going to be going through the pieces of this, but a quick preview. It has these 8 steps. The chair recognizes first a member, and in the first video, we explained what it means to recognize someone, and that the chair's major power is often said to be that he gets to recognize who gets to speak. So you can't have everybody get up and speak all at once, right? The member then, once recognized, is entitled to speak, and if there is no main motion already pending, the member may make a main motion. After that, another member is able to second the motion. And seconding the motion is, as we'll see, an important step. But by the way, it's not necessary if the motion comes from a committee that has more than one member on it, because basically the fact that there's more than one member on the committee means that you've accomplished what is necessary to show that more than one person is interested in it. Step 4, the chair states the question, and by stating the question, sounds kind of like repetitious and redundant, but it's very important that people hear what's going on. They're not following a script usually. It's important that the members say it, and then the chair states the question. And when the member states the question, at that point, it belongs to the assembly, and debate may begin. And it can be debate or amendment on that main motion, or any other of a number of other secondary motions that we'll be looking at down the line. The chair puts the question to a vote at the end of that debate. And putting the question to a vote means, all right, we're done, we close debate, and now I'll take the vote. Those in favor, right? Say aye, and those opposed say no. And that's voting, affirmative and negative. And then finally, after the voting, the chair announces the result of the vote. Okay, so this is a fast preview of how this works, and we're going to start and look a little more detail on these different steps. So recognition. In order to make a motion, whether it's a main motion or whatever, in most cases it will require a recognition, meaning that the chair has to call upon you or signal to you that it's your right now to speak and you have the floor. So this is done by standing up after the previous speaker has finished speaking and calling out the presiding officer by their title. Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, Mr. President, Madam President, whatever, right? Not supposed to call their name. We explained that in the previous video. Formalities dictate that you refer to the presiding officer by title, and that's something that should be done. And you don't begin talking about what you want to say until you have been recognized. The only thing you're allowed to say to get recognition is the name or the title of the to call attention to yourself, the title of the presiding officer. Page 19. So the chair may then recognize you, designating you as the next speaker. And the chair is supposed to use this phrase. He doesn't say, "Hi, Joe," or whatever. He says, "The chair recognizes Mr. Adams." Right? And the chair speaks of himself in the third person, as again we talked about in the last video. And as much as possible, the only time you use names is when you refer to somebody with their last name, preceded by Mr. or whatever. When recognized to speak, if you're Mr. Adams, you have the floor. Okay, and everybody else who is also vying, for instance, might be 5, 6 people standing up trying to get the attention of the chair, but the chair will only recognize one person at a time. Right? And everybody else is expected at that point to sit down and wait for their opportunity. When finished speaking, you sit down and thus you yield the floor. So these terms are important to know about having the floor and then yielding the floor. You yield the floor when you're finished speaking and you sit down, right? Making the motion. Now, once you have been recognized by the chair and there is no main motion already on the floor or pending, you may move to have your motion, main motion, before the assembly. And you do that with the words, "I move that," and then clearly describe the proposal. All right, and I'll show you the basic way to frame that in the next slide or so. But the proper way to do this is with those 3 words, "I move that." All right, and then you should not use, so it's a common mistake is for people to get up and say, "I motion," or "I'd like to make a motion," or "I want to make a motion." You know, liking to do something or wanting to do something is not doing something. This we should know from life. So don't say that, all right? And I once was actually in a courtroom and a very inexperienced attorney said, "Well, I'd like to move," and the judge really told him, "No, if you like to move, that's very good. And when you finally decide what you're going to do, then you may seek my attention again. But right now, I don't recognize what you like or what you want. I only recognize what you're going to do, and that in this case is to move. I move that is the proper wording." It is very important to say precisely what the words of the motion are to be. The group votes on exact language, not on a vague idea, right? Don't try to put a motion in front of the assembly that is a concept, right? That's not how this works, all right? They're not going to be discussing concepts. This is not a brainstorming session. This is an action. Remember, you're bringing before the assembly and you're introducing business, and that is a form of motion, which is to propose an action be taken by the assembly. The chair can require, by the way, that main motions be submitted by the mover in writing, and not just main motions, but complicated amendments as well. So a lot of people don't realize that. Because the chair is going to have to repeat this down the line in the next step or so. So it's very important to get the exact wording, and the secretary is going to have to be able to get this into the minutes in all likelihood. So check out the language there on page 20. The chair can require that main motions be submitted by the mover in writing. And it's also, again, something that's from the big book, this the RONR, or Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised 12th edition, in section 4, paragraph 18. So here we go, making the motion. Here's some examples of how to, a good example and a not so good example. All right, I move that in the first example. The tennis league, okay, establish a division open to juniors and seniors enrolled in city high schools. All right, so the assumption here, by the way, is that this group actually has some control over the tennis league, and this is not some third party. Generally speaking, you can only move what the group is to do. You can't make a motion that the Soviet Union disintegrate, or that Russia depose their their president. Okay, you can only move that your group do something. And let's assume that this is, your group is the tennis league, right? And that's a pretty well written resolution otherwise, right? Look how it might, in some cases, people may have tried to accomplish something similar, but they started off with the second bad example there. I move we establish a league that's a lot more open than the way we have been doing it, right? Well, it's not just more formal and simplified and ordinary, you might even think, speech, but it's also vague, and it uses words that should not really be an emotion. First of all, it doesn't say I move that, and then after the word that should be the organization's name, right? And you should avoid using we, right, in any kind of a main motion in particular. So who is we? When you say we, do you mean the mover and the second only? So, right, and especially for money resolutions, I move we give this this charity this amount of money. Who we? If you're, you should clearly articulate what the motion is trying to accomplish and who the actor, who is supposed to be doing it, and so stay away from the word we in motions, right? And you can see the rest. A league that's a lot more open than the way it had been. Well, that's not a proper motion to put before the assembly, because it's again, it's a concept. It's not an actual proposal that can be acted upon, right? So if you adopted such a thing, it wouldn't necessarily mean you'd be doing anything in particular. Or that people would still be arguing about, well, you did that, but that's not what I meant. Okay, well, if that's not what you meant, then that's probably something wrong with the motion, and you should make your motion clear enough that that kind of interpretation won't be necessary. Okay? So the next step is, you see on the list there, is seconding a motion. And this one is interesting because you don't have to actually be recognized to second a motion. This shows that at least two members want the proposal to be considered. So it actually, when somebody makes a motion, there could be more than one person in the room saying, I second. But only one is required under Roberts, unless your own organizational rules have something different. The purpose of the second is, again, to show that at least two members want the proposal to be considered. It does not necessarily mean that the seconder agrees with the motion. So somebody may second your motion just because they want to hear more about it, or they want to hear your debate. Remember, you can't begin debating something until the motion is before the assembly, and it doesn't go before the assembly until after it's been made, seconded, and stated by the chair. So they may be wanting to hear more of what you have to say, or other members have to say, before they decide whether or not to support the thing. Seconding alone does not imply support for the motion. On the other hand, if there is no second, the proposal is not put before the group for debate or decision. That's the rule. So again, it's because it's being used to essentially determine if there's enough support to bother debating this, because if there's no second, that would tend to imply that the person who's making this motion it's just their concern and no one else's. So at least having one other person who is interested in seeing this motion considered is all that's required by the second. And by the way, a little note here, under Roberts, if for some reason the chair does not do this and debate begins, or even in some cases we've seen where the motion was then adopted, it is not an objection or a point of order that, haha, this motion was not seconded, because Roberts says that after debate has begun, the failure to have a second is not material or relevant anymore, and it doesn't prejudice what you've done since. Okay. Stating the question. As I said before, the first steps that are going to bring this to the place where it can be debated are to make the motion, to have it seconded, and then the chair now has the obligation to state the question on the motion after it is moved and seconded, for it to be properly before the group for consideration, right? Until that time, until the chair does that, it doesn't belong to the assembly, and technically the person who is making it could change their mind and withdraw and say, no, never mind, I'd like to withdraw my motion. Okay. If it has not yet been stated by the chair, they have the power to do so. Okay. But once it is stated by the chair, that's no longer the call of the maker of the motion, unless the assembly agrees, and that would have to be put to the assembly for unanimous consent or a vote. That question, whether they can or cannot have permission to withdraw. So after it is moved and seconded, for it to be properly before the group for consideration, the chair has to state the question, repeating the exact language of the motion. Once a motion has been stated by the chair, it is said to be pending. And that means we can now begin consideration and debate of this. In stating the question, the chair has two duties. This is important, and you'll probably see some of the practice questions for this series of chapters bring this out, and it will be one you should carefully remember. The chair's two duties in stating the question. First, to determine if the motion is in order. And there's some motions which are improper if they violate the bylaws or something else. And so if the chair decides that the motion is not in order, the chair should explain that, but that would stop it right there. Secondly, and by the way, when we say, you see there's the asterisk there, the chair is not supposed to say you are out of order, when in fact it is the motion that is not in order and not the member. So try to avoid insulting a member by saying they are not in order. Only time you get into that is if it was a discipline because their conduct was out of order. And even then it's better to say that rather than that they as a human being are out of order. They're not, a broken machine, one would hope. So, and then B, the other duty is to ensure that the motion is clearly phrased. And if it's unclear, as we saw in that example, if they'd started with the bad example, then the chair should help the mover to reword it before stating it, excuse me. So, and that may require a short recess or standing at ease or something else to try to get the language in good order, which is another reason why it's very, very good if it is in writing when there's any question about that, because that will make it clear. So sometimes I've seen where you have one person who will say, well, why don't you make a motion like this? And then somebody else says, so moved. That's not actually permissible in Roberts, so moved. The person who is making the motion has to be able to state it clearly. And then afterwards, the chair is going to have to state it at this step. So be careful to make sure we get the correct wording. It will have to go in the minutes, assuming that whether it fails or it's successful. At this point, because it's now before the assembly, it's time for debate, right? And debate is initiated by, after stating the question, the chair says, are you ready for the question? Or alternatively, ever since the 11th edition, the chair can say, is there any debate? Can ask about that, right? I always have preferred, are you ready for the question? And that statement, are you ready for the question, simply means when, are you ready to vote now, or do you want to do something else with this motion first? And yeah, debate would be the logical first step, but it could also be an amendment that somebody wants to make, or referral to a committee or something else. So the formal way, and which is supposed to be used in conventions and large associations, instead of asking, is there any debate, they should go back to, are you ready for the question? And after each debate point, the chair should ask again, are you ready for the question? If you want to debate, then you rise at that time and seek recognition so you can continue the debate. Or if you have an amendment, then you rise when you hear that question. But if nobody rises to debate, nobody rises to make an amendment, then apparently you are ready as an assembly for the question, and the chair can put the question to a vote. So if someone rises to be recognized, then the chair says, the chair recognizes whatever. And the standard preference that's required in Roberts is the maker of the motion gets to be recognized first after the motion has been stated. So going back to before, when we have people who want to be able to debate before they make their motion, you can assure them that they'll be called upon first, in debate. But first we have to get the motion established, what motion we're talking about, before debate begins. And so pre-debate by the maker is not permissible. So recognize the maker. Pages 19 through 22, you see this process in debate. The general rule about how the chair is supposed to decide who gets recognition or who is going to be recognized to speak is that a member can establish entitlement to the floor by rising first after it has been yielded. All right. A member cannot establish entitlement to the floor by rising before it has been yielded. Right. So don't stand up or raise your hand or make cat calls or notices while somebody's talking, so that you will hopefully be called upon by the chair. That's rude and it's out of order and a breach of decorum. The only time you're permitted to rise to seek recognition is after the floor has been yielded by the previous speaker. There are exceptions, however, again, and one of them is that the maker of the motion has a one-time first preference. So after the motion has been stated, the chair should look to the maker of the motion and see if they want to speak first in favor of the motion. If they decline or if they don't take advantage of that opportunity, that's a one-time offer, and that offer is gone. After that, they just are on an equal footing with everybody else. And the other rules of preference are that when you have a lot of people speaking back and forth, the chair should give preference in recognition to one who has not yet spoken. So if before you recognize somebody who has already spoken and is looking to speak a second time. And the other thing the chair is supposed to do is to alternate as much as possible between supporters and opponents. So if the chair says, well, we just heard from somebody who is opposed to the motion, is there anyone who wants to? Now you would ask, is there anyone who would like to speak for the motion? Or you might even say, is there anyone who's not yet spoken who would like to speak for the motion? So that you're trying to accomplish both of those aims. One who has not spoken yet, and alternating between supporters, the pro and con in the debate. Okay. As in the case of rising to make a motion, to speak in debate, stand up immediately after the previous speaker has finished speaking and call out, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, Mr. President, Madam President, whatsoever, the title of the presiding officer, and then await recognition. The chair may then designate you as the next speaker, or as we say, recognize you, calling you by name or title, saying, for example, Mr. Jackson, or the delegate from Clayton County, or the delegate at microphone number 2. And sometimes in a small enough meeting, simply by nodding to the person who's being recognized, if that's not too confusing. Page 29. Remember, there should be no debate on a matter before a motion regarding it has been made, seconded, and stated by the chair. Debate, as a term, means discussion on the merits of the question. There's a lot of people who just like to say, is there any discussion? It's better to say, is there any debate? That's what Roberts tells us is the acceptable alternative to, are you ready for the question? And discussion should be focused on whether to adopt the proposal that's made in the motion or not. That's why it's a pro and con debate. So whether the proposal or the proposed action should be taken or not is what you should be rising to speak for or against. If you're not sure, then it's not really a proper parliamentary procedure to seek recognition and then just ramble about, well, I don't know, maybe this is a good idea, maybe this is not a good idea. If you don't know what your position is on this, it's best that you do not seek recognition and you sit and listen so you can help to form your opinion and what plan you will have to vote for or against the motion. It's also important to know that not all motions, in fact, are debatable, right? So I don't know why I have two motions up there, but there it is on this slide. For instance, all main motions are debatable, and the motions to postpone, to amend, or to refer to a committee are debatable. Right? But a couple of very important motions are not debatable. Motion like to limit or extend debate limits, or to close debate, or to table, or to adjourn, right? Or to recess if that's a privileged motion, or we're going to see to suspend the rules. We'll look at those a little bit later on. It's helpful if you consult a table or a chart, and there are some good ones around. I'll be sharing one with you a little bit later. Unless a special rule is adopted to provide otherwise, there are speech limits for debate, okay? Even in Robert's rules. A member may speak twice on any debatable motion on the same day for up to 10 minutes each time. That's actually a lot of time, right? So, and you notice I said, unless a special rule is adopted to provide otherwise, many groups feel that allowing for 2 speeches of 10 minutes each it unnecessarily prolongs the meeting, and they will pass a special rule. Usually they don't touch the speaking twice part of this, but they will maybe reduce the 10 minutes in a special rule to something more like 3 or even 2 minutes each time. This time, whatever it is, and so again, if the bylaws or your special rules do not provide for some other time limit, Robert says it's 10 minutes, and that's how it goes. The time is non-transferable, which means you've seen enough things on probably C-SPAN or whatever where in Congress they'll say, I yield my time to the member from, and that means even though I get to speak for 10 minutes, I'm not going to speak for 10 minutes, and I'll give my 10 minutes to somebody else. That is not permissible under Robert's Rules of Order, right? Congress makes up their own rules, and that's not a Robert's Rule permission to, it's non-transferable, any speech like that. It cannot be yielded to another, nor saved, nor banked. You can't say, well, I know I'm only supposed to speak twice for 10 minutes each, but the first time I only spoke for 5 minutes, and the second time another 5 minutes. So actually, I think I got another 10 minutes, and I'm going to be able to speak a third and fourth time. No, you can't bank unused time, right? Once you yield the floor, your permission to speak for 10 minutes is, or whatever the limit of that has been adopted, is gone. Another thing about debate that's important is that debate must be germane. The term germane is used to mean that it has to somehow or another relate to the motion under discussion. So if there is a motion about the tennis league and setting up a different schedule for the tennis league and the way they enroll people, then if somebody rises and says, oh, I don't care about tennis leagues, but we really need to have a picnic. And that's not germane to the topic that is being debated, and therefore the chair should stop that by explaining to the speaker that your remarks must be germane and related to the motion that is currently being debated. Going off on irrelevant topics is not in order. And the other thing is there's actually a fairly large section in Robert's Rules in the 12th edition in section 43, which lays out what are called rules of decorum. And these are rules that need to be enforced by the chair if they're broken, but if the chair doesn't catch it, any member could rise to a point of order in order to ask the chair to enforce these rules. You see these rules in the third edition of In Brief, in pages 30 and 32. Okay. These are the rules briefly and again highlighted. First, you have to confine your remarks to the merits of the pending question. That's this thing I just said before, that it's if the remarks are not germane, then it's really a breach of a rule of decorum, because you're only allowed to talk about the merits, the pros and cons of the question which is pending. You must refrain from attacking another member or their motives. All right. So you're not supposed to get into personal arguments in debate. It's supposed to be confined to the question which is before the group, the pending question, and the merits of that pending question, and not some launch into attack about, well, Joe, he always likes motions like this because that's just kind of a strange person he is. So it would be a breach of decorum. Okay. So you have to address all remarks through the chair. So you're not supposed to engage in direct debate with anybody who is speaking. If you heard somebody who was just speaking for the motion and you're dead against the motion, when you rise, you speak against the motion, but you direct your remarks as if nobody else is in the room but you and the chair, directly through the chair. You do not turn to the previous speaker and say, well, that's silly, or whatever else. No direct debate with anyone else in the hall. All remarks have to be addressed to and through the chair. Avoid the use of members' names. So it's wrong in the first place to even talk about another member and reference them by name. Right? These rules have been a great assistance, trial and error, in the Parliament for many, 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 many years, decades and centuries, in fact, because once you start getting into name calling, you will find that the debate falls apart, and you're not going to be able to convince anybody of anything once you have descended to calling them names. So even to use their names is not a great idea, because it tends to make the debate personal, which you don't want, and if you're really seriously trying to convince someone. You should refrain from speaking adversely on a prior action not pending. There may have been a motion passed 2 meetings ago about the picnic, and you're still unhappy about it and brooding. So you can't go to that unless you are offering a motion to rescind or amend that. Otherwise, just getting up and saying, well, we'd have plenty of money if you hadn't, endorsed that picnic. That was a stupid picnic. I said so at the time. No. All of that would be a breach of decorum. Okay. Refrain from speaking against your own motion. This actually does happen sometimes as some kind of strange strategy, but it is a breach of decorum to make a motion and then get up and speak against it. Now, a motion might end up being amended to the point where it's no longer the same as it was, and you could change your mind about it because of that amendment or change. But otherwise, it's actually a breach of decorum to speak against your own motion. And it's also a breach of decorum to read your testimony from anything. So reading reports, long passages, this is not permitted under Roberts, particularly if you have the long debate limit of 10 minutes. Now, it's less of a problem if you can only speak for 2 or 3 minutes anyway, for you when people write out what the key things that they want to say, and probably there will be no objection to that. But theoretically, it is a breach, and someone could raise a point of order on any violation of any of these rules of decorum. Once there's been an interruption, for instance, a point of order or whatever, then the person who was speaking must sit down and wait for the issue to be resolved and not try to continue speaking. Refrain, the last one is sort of the generic one, which I think can be very useful. It is a breach of decorum to disturb the assembly. So cross chat, during a meeting and talking to friends and telling jokes and making a lot of noise is disturbing the assembly. I even remember one convention I was at when the chair was trying to figure out what to do because there were a couple of people in the back row who were playing this really loud radio of some music, and it was very disruptive. Or answering cell phones or things like that. That's disturbing the assembly, and an objection can be made, or the chair can act by advising the person that that's a breach of decorum and they have to cease doing that. Okay. How do you handle it? I always like this this little scene from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where the chair raps the gavel, and under Roberts, lightly. You're not supposed to bang the gavel, 3 or 4 or 5 times when you find disturbing behavior. Robert says, rather, you're supposed to rap the gavel lightly and then say something on the order of this: the chair must ask the member to confine his remarks to the merits of the pending question. And then, having been suitably chastised, the member may continue to speak. But if they continue to breach it, then the chair could take more severe action, like telling him, "No, you can't continue with that speech. Please sit down." Okay, most of that's provided in the actual 12th edition. But yeah, I thought you might want to know how to do it. All right. When no one else is seeking recognition to amend or refer or postpone or speak on a debatable question, right? All those things could be happening during that debate. When nobody else is seeking recognition to do any of those things, the chair repeats the motion as it will then be voted on and conducts the vote. This is called putting the question to a vote, okay? Or putting the motion to a vote. So notice the difference in the verbs. Stating is one step where you open it up to debate and all of these other possibilities. And putting actually is what the chair does when debate is now finished and we're going to go to the next phase, which is the vote, right? Stating and putting, right? I was reminded of all of this when I had the good fortune to be able to be in Australia and as an arbitrator, and I got to sit on an arbitration panel. I noticed, if you've ever seen any British courtroom dramas, they commonly use the form when they're interviewing or asking questions of a witness. They will say, "I put it to you," and when they say that, what they mean is, "I am asking you to say yes or no. I put it to you. Did you do this?" All right, so it's very much in that usage that the phrase in Robert's Rules, or the step of handling a motion in Robert's Rules, is to put the question to a vote, or putting the question. Okay. And then the vote is conducted by the chosen or required method. Okay, putting the question. So very similar to the verbiage that was used in stating the question, the chair now says the question is on the adoption of the motion. And at this point, it could be a little different. It might have been amended. So the chair is going to read the motion as it is now to be voted on. And as we'll see later on, it is this form of the motion that goes into the minutes and not any previous form of the motion. Now, they may be the same. You may be voting on exactly the same language that was moved and seconded and stated by the chair and debated, but it was possible that it could have been amended during that process in some way or another. And in this case, what's going to be put before the assembly for a vote is its current form, and that would be after any possible amendments have taken place. The question is on the adoption of the motion that the tennis league, blah, 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 okay, as an example, right? And then the chair takes the vote. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. This is the most common form, and it's the default way of doing vote, which is a voice vote, called a voice vote. You must always call for both the negative and the positive, no matter, or excuse me, all the affirmative, those in favor, as well as those opposed. So you can't just say those in favor say aye and then not ask those opposed say no, or give that opportunity for people to do that. Later on, you'll see there where you look at other ways that you can do voting, but this is the sort of the default, unless your rules have some other mechanism. Today, in the land of Zoom, a voice vote or on either a video conference or a teleconference is inappropriate. You're not going to get an accurate count in those situations. So you need to have another method that'll enable voting to take place and produce a proper result. Okay. And then after the voting is conducted by whatever means, then the chair has to announce the result and tell people what happened. Was the motion adopted, or was it not adopted? Was it lost? And those are the two possibilities, right? The motion is adopted or the motion is lost. And then you move on, right? If the motion is adopted, you would say a few more words about what the assembly is now going to do about the action that that has been adopted by the assembly, right? Okay, we're looking now at some what are called subsidiary motions or secondary motions. These motions are not main motions, and so this is not going to be prohibited by the basic rule that only one main motion can be for the assembly at a time, because these motions can appear and on top of, as it were, a main motion. And you have to settle these subsidiary or secondary motions before you can get back to the main motion, right? So Roberts, in brief, third edition, presents at this point, pages 34 and 35, the motion, subsidiary motion, to limit or extend limits of debate. Right? This is a motion that suspends the rules of debate and adopts an order to fix the time for closing debate, or limit the time spent on debate, or to change the length and number of speeches. Any one of those things can be offered in this kind of a motion, right? Because it is, in essence, suspending a rule which is already in place, it cannot be adopted by the ordinary means, and we'll see. So let's look at to begin with. Does it need a second? Is it debatable? Is it amendable? And what is the quantum of vote necessary? First of all, yes, it needs a second. Okay, it's not something one person can just make happen. Okay, but it's not debatable, right? So this motion is not debatable. Once made, no debate, all right? So debating on whether or not you're going to extend the limits of debate is too much of a mirror syndrome here. So according to Roberts, you wouldn't get into a debate on this. However, it's conceivably amendable, depending upon, for instance, if somebody said, I think we should limit the number of speeches to 4 minutes. Okay, fine. Somebody else may want to amend that down to 3 or 2. So that length is an amendable feature of this motion, and therefore, yes, the motion could be amended. So, but even though amendments are usually debatable, when you're amending something which is like this, not debatable in the first place, the amendment is not debatable either. Okay. Well, what is the vote then that's going to be required for this? And the vote is not majority, but 2/3. So it takes 2/3 or unanimous consent, right? So that's always an alternative. If there's no objection, the length of speeches will be 4 minutes instead of 10. Right? And you look around, no objection, well, then you've done it and you don't have to go into another form of vote. And by the way, if the vote is 2/3, you can't do a voice vote anymore, because you can't say those in favor say aye, those opposed say no, if you have to have a 2/3 vote, because our hearing is just not going to be that good to be able to pick that out. In that case, you would have to do a rising vote, as we say, all right, which is usually a standing vote or use of voter cards or some other mechanism. Now, another motion similar to this, which is even higher rank, is the motion of the previous question. This, again, similarly suspends the rules of debate, but it adopts an order to bring the assembly to an immediate vote on one or more pending questions, ending amendment and debate. Right? So because it's similar, you can expect that we're going to have a similar answers to these questions. First of all, yes, it requires a second. This is not something that one person can foist or force upon the association or the meeting, right? The proper way to move it, as you can see, is I move the previous question. If there's like the main motion and an amendment and maybe a motion to refer this to a committee are all pending, and in order, then if you should indicate what debate you're trying to close, and so the most common way to do that is by seeking to the previous question, or another way to say that is seeking to close debate on all pending questions. So that's again what this means, to close debate and go immediately to a vote. So, but it does require a second. It is not debatable. And it's not amendable either, right? So, but as before, it's a 2/3 vote. So it can't be voted on by a voice vote. You'd have to, if it's not unanimous consent, you'd have to have a rising vote or even a counted vote if necessary. Okay, there is recognized in both in brief and in the major book here, the 12th edition, at those sites, page 36 on the of the 3rd edition, a particular misuse, and this happens in a lot of meetings. So we're trying to get people to understand this. For somebody who is just sitting down and has not been recognized to call out question, I call for the question. This is not a motion for the previous question, because the motion for the previous question can only be made by somebody who has sought recognition, got recognition, made the motion, and had it duly seconded. All right. So, but there are, as I say, these kind of misuses where some people have gotten away with calling for the question, and the chair, inexperienced chair, will sometimes say, oh, well, the question has been called, so therefore we go right to debate, we end debate, and we go right to the vote. No, that would be incorrect and not proper parliamentary procedure. Right? Calls of the question by members from their seats who have not been recognized are not motions for the previous question, and are disorderly if another member is speaking or seeking recognition. Right? So the way it's supposed to be handled after it has been moved and seconded is the question should, as you see in red there, the chair is supposed to use that language. The previous question is moved on whatever the motion is, or maybe all motions pending. Those in favor of ordering the previous question on those motions rise so that the chair can look, all right, and then be seated. Okay, those opposed rise. The chair can look, be seated. There are 2/3 in the affirmative, and the previous question is ordered. Or there are not 2/3 in the affirmative, and so the previous question is lost or fails. Amendments. To try to get the group to agree with these ideas, you can propose amendments, which, if adopted, modify the wording and, within limits, often the meaning of the main motion. The vote on an amendment does not decide whether the main motion will be adopted. Here's another classic mistake in parliamentary procedure where an amendment is adopted and then they think that they've then therefore adopted the entire motion as amended. That's not the case. If there's an amendment, you deal with the amendment, and after the amendment, you go back to the motion as amended and you deal with that. You have to go through that process in exactly that, in those steps. Right? So the vote on an amendment does not decide whether the main motion will be adopted, only whether the wording in the main motion will be changed. After an amendment is adopted, the main motion as amended may be further debated and further amended. Page 39 of your in brief. It modifies, or it's supposed to modify or clarify the meaning of a pending motion before the pending motion itself is acted upon. And there are three basic processes of amendment. Insert or add, which is considered pretty much one of those processes. So inserting, meaning in the middle someplace, or adding words at the end. Or the other one is to strike something out or delete it, as it were. But to strike out is the correct verbiage. And then the last one is a combination of the two by striking something out and inserting something in its place. So those are the three processes of amendment, 39 to 50 in your third edition. Okay. There's also another subsidiary motion which falls into this category, and it's kind of a type of strike out and insert process. It's the motion to substitute. That is, in effect, to strike out a whole paragraph or sometimes the entire text of a resolution or main motion and to insert another. So because it's an amendment, it's going to be handled with the following basic rules. Yes, it has to be seconded. The amendment is going to be debatable. Yes, unless the motion to be amended, is not debatable. But if the motion to be amended is debatable, so then is the amendment. And debatable. Okay. My apologies. Okay, but the same rule follows with everything else. So it can be amended more than once. It can be amended. It is itself a primary amendment as a substitute, and it is subject to a secondary amendment after that. Right. So finally, the vote on amendments is majority, not 2/3, right, to be able to adopt an amendment, even a substitute amendment. Right. So we just introduced these new terms, secondary amendment and primary amendment. So a secondary amendment or amendment of the second degree modifies or clarifies the meaning of a pending primary amendment, right? And the secondary amendments may not be, again, amended. In other words, because that would be a third tertiary or whatever amendment, I guess. Roberts does not permit that. You can have a primary amendment and a secondary amendment on top of that, but at any given time, that's as far as you can go. The original, a primary amendment, and then a secondary amendment. But like speech, an amendment itself must be germane to be in order. In other words, it must in some way involve the same question that is raised by the motion to which it is applied, right? So it cannot introduce an independent question, but it can be hostile to or even defeat the spirit of the original motion. I like to, again, point to some of the things we're used to when we look at congressional debates, where they will maybe amend, a budget motion that's about funding unemployment, and you may have somebody try to amend it to add in funding for a battleship. So, well, that would be perhaps okay in Congress. It's not okay in Robert's rules. The battleship amendment would not be germane to the motion that is being proposed, and so it would not be in order and not allowable under Robert's rules. And then I like in the third edition, in the previous editions as well of the In Brief book, the authors have tried to simplify the rules of amendment, which can get quite complicated, by articulating this settled rule. The settled rule is I think, a good way to think of it. The time of the group should not be wasted by making it vote over and over again on the same thing. So once the group has voted on an amendment, that specific matter is considered settled. If the group has voted down an amendment to add certain words, you cannot again have somebody rise to make another amendment to put those words back in again, because that's settled, right? And that's also a basic principle in Roberts, that once a motion has been adopted, you can't have somebody get up and try to reverse course on it immediately, except by we have a special motion, which is to reconsider, or if it's not at the same meeting, to rescind. That would be possible also, but those would require a higher, some sort of higher order of handling that we'll explain later. We're not there yet. Okay, you cannot propose another amendment in this case to add substantially the same words in the same place if the amendment to do that was defeated. Okay. There are ways a group can go back and change, as they say, but those we'll be looking at in a future video. So also, again, under the settled rule, the basic rule is that after the group has voted that certain words shall or shall not be part of a motion, you cannot offer another amendment that raises the same question of content and effect. Common sense is necessary to apply this principle from case to case. I like that little addition. So, because you can get into complicated situations when you're adding changes to a motion. Right. So it's one thing to have a motion to buy the or to that the society purchase a new vehicle for its executive officer. And then somebody might amend it to strike out new and insert late model, right? That would be an amendment, right? So if it was if there's another amendment, that's a primary amendment. To get to a secondary amendment on top of that, you would have to be amending only the late model, all right? So you might want to even say, instead of late model, something else that makes it even an older car. Okay, strike as a secondary amendment late model and insert used. So you could have the original motion, an amendment, and a primary amendment and a secondary amendment. And of course, you'd have to vote on them in the backwards order there. You'd first vote on whether or not it should be used instead of late model. And after that's dispatched, then you go back to the main motion, or excuse me, the primary amendment, whatever it might be. And then after that amendment is dealt with, then you go back to the main motion as amended, if any of those were adopted. So that pretty much concludes our second video here. As before, I will remind you that the practice questions in the study guide, in this case on the pages 10 through 13 of that PDF download, should be now able to be answered by you after listening to this video. And I suggest you go and try to answer those questions and see if you understand what the right answer is and also why that's the right answer as much as possible. Those would be questions 13 through 38 in the set of practice questions. And our next video, which after you have again prepared by reading these chapters, 6, 7, and 8, will be the third video, and that will take up postpone, refer, rescind, reconsider, and voting. So some of the things I talked about tonight in this second video, we'll look at other ways to handle a change that can find a way for the assembly to change its mind, which is what you see being covered in this next set of three, particularly this next set of three chapters, 6, 7, and 8, excuse me, pages 52 to 76. So please read those pages before going to the third video so you're properly prepared. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I hope you will be joining me again as we go through the third third video in this set to prepare for the membership quiz for the National Association of Parliamentarians. Aloha, and as we say in Hawaii, which is a way of saying goodbye, and see you later.